So welcome to this conversation with Amjambo, Africa, and Amjambo Time. We want you to introduce yourself. Of course, we know you, but for the sake of record, please.
Sure. I'm Chellie Pingree. I am the congressperson for the 1st District of Maine. Maine only has 2 members of Congress, and I represent about half of the population of the state. And I divide my time between Maine and Washington.
Yeah, thank you for making a time for us, and it's appreciated. So as you can imagine, the gears are changing. We are waiting for a new administration coming January 20th. And there is a lot that's going on in the community and statewide, federal-wide. So how concerned are you? What are you gathering? What are you feeling from the constituents in terms of the incoming administration vis-a-vis immigrants and new Americans?
Sure. I mean, as you can imagine, we're very concerned about the potential policies of this new administration. And my office in Portland sees a very large number of people who are new Mainers, who are in the process of filing for asylum, who are looking for work permits, who are trying to have a member of their family arrive in this country, who maybe need to make a visit. I mean, we have 3 people in our office, in our Portland office, who work with constituents. And you can imagine that we're hearing a very high level of concern from people just with the uncertainty of what may happen. We already deal with a lot of concerns, as I said, people who have been waiting on their work permit or who are anxious to have a family member arrive in this country, or who just deal with the many complications of this process. So we work very closely with the immigration lawyers in our state and ILAP and other organizations that support our new Mainer population. And we plan to continue to be supportive, but we know there are a lot of unknowns, and I really understand how fearful people must be, or just the level of uncertainty that they have, and that's a hard time.
Yeah, I guess. And that's the community sense. And that community is looking at you or onto you and other elected officials. And they say probably have people in Washington who will be fighting for us or working for us or making sure that every constituent is protected in many ways. So how are you ready to make this happen? I mean, how prepared are you? How are you coercing with other colleagues on that side where we don't arrive many times?
Yeah, it's a good question. And you're absolutely right. We plan to continue to fight for our constituents, the people of the state of Maine. As you know, Maine has been a very welcoming state for the most part to new Mainers. We fully recognize that we've had a declining population, that we have huge shortages in our workforce, and we're very pleased to have new people choosing to come and live in Maine and work in Maine. We have about 2 jobs for every person looking for a job. And so many of the new Mainers have taken positions in a wide variety of professions, everything from the service industry, fish processing, the food industry, healthcare, to engineers and medical personnel, and bringing with them the skills and degrees that they come with. So we're very grateful for the people who've chosen to live in Maine. And we know how difficult it is, both the journey that many of them took to come here, the process of applying for asylum, the difficulties of getting a work permit, getting your work permit renewed. We are intimately involved with all of these processes and have been fighting to make the processes better under the Biden administration to try to streamline the process. We plan to continue to fight. I strongly disagree with the immigration policies of the Trump administration. I served in office during the 4 years that Donald Trump was the president before, and know what he did and attempted to do during those 4 years. And I'm concerned that he has even bigger plans to undo much of the important, the fundamentals of our immigration system. I should say, my grandfather was an immigrant. My grandmother was an immigrant. And so I'm only, the next generation in my country to follow my parents. So I know how our country was built on immigrants. They're hardworking, they value this country, and we're all very fortunate to be here. So I consider that fundamental to who we are as a country. And I am not alone in Washington in wanting to fight back on the potential Trump administration policies. As you mentioned, he doesn't become the president until January 20th. It's very likely he will start to try to implement some policies right away. We are trying to anticipate and prepare, think about what he did last time. What has he said on the campaign trail? What's written in Project 2025, which is, a big thick book that's their blueprint for what they want to do in the future. And I think you'll find a lot of immigration advocates and lawyers, ready to fight back from day one. One of the challenges is until we see what they do, we don't know exactly what they're going to do. And I am reluctant to try to make people feel even more fearful about the unknown. It's a long list of things he could do or he could try to do, but we don't know which ones they are. I do know that when he had a travel ban, for instance, in 2017, that was one of the first things he did in his last administration. He may try to do that again. But there was an immediate protest from American citizens, from others who said, how dare you? How dare you restrict travel into the United States? How dare you stigmatize certain countries? And I think that was responsible for making it somewhat difficult for him to implement that ban. So I anticipate we will see not only members of Congress looking for every way possible to fight, but also, just your friends and neighbors in the community who will be angry. But it is hard to anticipate yet exactly what we need people to organize or oppose. And that's a frustrating period of time because we're, 6 weeks to 2 months away from any of these things even being announced. And I know it's hard for people to face the unknown, but I don't know exactly. Nobody knows exactly what they may try to do.
Yeah, that's a good statement. You mentioned the 4 years you served with him as a president, and do you feel like you have some experience or some tools or some wisdom that you can draw from that time to this time, and especially with the whole power that is within his reach? Congress, the Senate, and then the White House. So how do you see this challenging going forward?
Yeah, I don't want to sugarcoat this because it's it's not a good outcome to an election. Currently, Donald Trump, will be taking the office of the presidency in January, and the Republicans will control the Senate and the House. So that's that's a lot of power to rest in one party. I've been in office when this happened, or at least the House was lost before. And then I've also been there when we had the majority in the House so we could push back. It's much easier when you control one body of Congress. When he becomes president on January 20th, the House will only have a 1 vote margin for the Republicans. They'll have some vacancies. And so you can imagine that we will try to use all of our parliamentarian skills and all of our, ability to vote against some of their policies, to try to vote them down. There are some things the president can do by what's called executive order. So he can, on his own do certain things, but many things that he wants to do, particularly anything related to funding or defunding or shifting funds to another area, he has to have the approval of Congress. We will have some, I think in some areas, we'll have some like-minded Republicans. So I don't want to make this seem like it's strictly, partisan. There will be areas where people feel the pressure because they have large immigrant communities or asylum-seeking communities, and they're in the Republican Party, but they also want to be, doing the right thing. So we will look for every mechanism we can find to block things like executive orders, to block potential votes that come to the floor, to block shifts in funding. We learned some things to do in his last term. But there's always slightly different configurations. You have different members of Congress. You have different, numbers in the House and the Senate. So some of them, you literally figure out every day. It's a mystery until the morning when you wake up, trying to figure out, okay, how will we handle this today? Sometimes it comes down to, who's out sick during a vote, or who, creates a vacancy on one side or the other. But I just want you to know these are strongly felt beliefs in the Democratic Party, and we will fight back with every tool that we've got. I think there will also be lawsuits from groups on the outside on things that the president will very likely overreach his constitutional authority as president. So we will fight back on that front. And I think, again, we'll need the support of the public. We'll need people who are, willing to come forward and tell their stories, talk about what this means to their family, about the roles that they play in our community, to remind people that these aren't just sort of numbers on a graph. These are actual human beings who work in our schools, in our restaurants, in our hospitals, and they're vital parts of our community. And we need their friends and neighbors to speak up, which people did during the last term of Donald Trump. And I think we will see that again. Exactly what the issue will be, I don't know, but I think we'll have to work in close cooperation with everybody in Maine and the immigrant community, and certainly those who want to be there to support them.
You mentioned executive powers or orders that the president can make. As we are a month or few days to go, do you think Biden has any leverage that he can do to maintain the immigration and policies thriving? Do you see any power, or it's a lost game on this side?
I can guarantee you that the White House and the legal teams and the advocacy organizations are looking for everything that President Biden could do and his administration could do before they leave office. So no stone will be left unturned. One of the challenges is that, for President Biden to do something by executive order could slow things down, but Donald Trump can reverse an executive order on his first day. So anything that can be handled by executive order can be undone. Anything that requires congressional approval, and we have tried very hard, as you know, there was a compromise immigration reform bill in the Senate that was basically blocked by President Trump before he got there because he wanted to keep the situation, some of the problems going. We don't have the power in the House because the Republicans control the House. So we don't have the power to pass legislation. Legislation is more durable. It can last longer. But the Republicans in the House, they have their version of an immigration bill, which is not a good one. And we have not been able to move forward anything in the House of Representatives. So it's very limited. But again, we are trying hard. I recently sent a letter to Secretary Mayorkas at Homeland Security to try to get this administration to permanently authorize work permits for 2 years rather than the renewal process. As you know, we know it takes a long time to get your work permit renewed. It takes you long enough to get it. I'm trying to shorten the period to 30 days that you have to wait before you can apply for it after you've applied for asylum. It's currently 6 months. And then there's a whole reapplication process, and it is temporarily allowed for 2 years. We're trying to get that made permanent. And I think if we could get that done before this administration leaves, it would be harder to undo, but could be undone. I don't want to make, I don't want to have any false promises here, but we're certainly pushing on that. That's one area that we've seen as really important to Maine, because, people come here, they apply for asylum, and then they want to go to work. They want to be working on the first day they get there. And there's sometimes a misnomer that, people come to our country thinking they don't have to work. No, they're some of the hardest working people. And if, I've had many conversations with the employers of Maine who are just so pleased with the work that new Mainers do and the hours they put in and their devotion to working to support their family and support themselves. So that's one of the areas. But you're right. It's a good question. We're looking for everything possible, and we're open to suggestions.
Yeah, so let's go to local, from federal to local. So what do you advise the local administration, from the governor to down institutions, to do in the coming years, whenever things will go? We don't know, like you mentioned, What do
Yeah,
you think about them?
yeah. I mean, I feel that, Maine has been, it's been a very welcoming state. And wanted to support new Mainers coming to our state and help people make that transition between when they arrive and the amount of time it takes them to go to work. So I think that will continue, and you'll hear from a lot of employers who put pressure on the governor, the local officials to be supportive of the people who've come to work in our state. I know the Attorney General, Aaron Fry, has said that he's working with other attorney generals from like-minded states around the country to look for ways that, if anything, that the federal government tries to impose on our state that is unconstitutional or not allowable, that they can push back. Same with the governor. She'll be working to uphold the Maine Constitution, not the demands or desires of a Trump administration. There's talk of using the National Guard if Donald Trump moves forward with some sort of a deportation process. But it's also thought that some states could block that he's more likely to start doing that in a state that has a governor who's predisposed to want to go against current immigration policy. So I think you'll see a fair amount of cooperation, and certainly cities like Maine, like Portland, Maine, and Lewiston, Maine, who have a long history of refugees, asylum seekers, new Mainers. I think you'll see a lot of support within the communities to continue that. But there may be some areas where there are tricky legal battles, or some of these things are imposed on us. When you hear Donald Trump talking about a deportation idea, I mean, one of the things that's often left out is who's going to staff it. There isn't sufficient capacity in our current ICE or Border Patrol to do the level of things that he's suggested he's going to do. So then you start to talk to the states or the counties, and I think he would find less cooperation there, less of a desire to divert resources to do this. And even at the federal level, if he wants to divert some of the funding that's currently available in those agencies, you have to get congressional approval to move that, and there could be more opposition than he thinks. So these things won't all necessarily be easy for them to implement, and I do think it's important that Mainers continue to let our governor and legislators know, your local city councilors and mayors, what people are worried about, and that their support will be needed. We will certainly, the federal delegation will certainly be working with local communities if there are things that impact our state, or they attempt to use the resources of our state to do some things that, might be questionable practices.
Mm. So how about the feelings that churches, schools, or courts, they will be no longer protected spaces? Do you have some concerns?
I have I have concerns about everything. I mean, I don't think we can drop our guard on any of these issues or situations. But I think there are some constitutional protections. I'm not an immigration lawyer, so I don't know all of the ins and outs, but we'll be learning them as fast as we possibly can, or any challenges that are made. We'll be there, and I'm going to worry about everything, and I want to make sure there are places that people are safe, that they've been traditionally safe. But this is an administration that doesn't always respect the norms and history of what's going on, or the rule of law, even at some point. So, but that requires all of us to fight back and to point out those places where they're misusing the law or misinterpreting what the law allows.
Do you feel confident that the law enforcement will not assist in Maine to do the president's wish?
I don't want to speak for any other branch of government or any law enforcement branch or any county that, may decide to go rogue and act on its own. But I do think there will be resistance. For instance, with our governor using the National Guard for something that she does not believe is legal, or uses resources that belong elsewhere. We're not clear. There's no clear understanding of, given this, the number of times that Donald Trump mentioned deportation in his campaign, it was not at all clear who he thinks would qualify for that, or what criteria they would use, or how they would go about doing it. And then never any recognition from their side. I've never heard any recognition from Donald Trump or his administration, future administration side of the economic impact that would have, not to mention the, human impact and the cultural impact that would have in our communities, but just the number of people who are in our workforce today doing everything imaginable. So I don't know yet what they will actually try to do or how we will fight it. And I don't want you to think that again, I'm not trying to sugarcoat anything or assume it's going to be easy. I think we're going to have some big fights on our hands, and it's going to require a lot of pushing back.
Yeah, definitely. There is this combination of people who were born U.S. citizens and non-U.S. citizens, and in times like these, what do you advise those who have the rights to be in this country they can do to help those who are not, or who are targeted in the community?
Yeah, I mean, first off, for anybody who's in any stage of their own process, their asylum seeking process or their work permit process, I recommend that everybody, go through all of their applications and their papers, and whether they're working with ILAP or they have an immigration or immigration lawyer, or call our office, and any questions that people have, now's the time to ask those questions, and just make sure individuals and families know exactly where they stand and where they are in the process. And I think for all of us in Maine, particularly as some of this starts to unfold, it will be a really important time to educate ourselves, because there's a lot of people who say, oh, I love the diversity of the new immigrants, or I'm so fortunate to have some new Mainers working in my business, or going to my kids' school, or all those things. But it's going to require all of us to get a little deeper understanding of what the rights of those individuals are, and what potentially could be challenged of what we now assume is part of daily life, birthright citizenship. I mean, that's a really important fundamental, for instance, of American life. If your parents come here, they're working on their citizenship, you're born here, you're automatically a United States citizen. Well, if Donald Trump decides to challenge that or look at it differently, I think it behooves all of us to say, wait a minute, am I ready to have what I think is a fundamental part of American life questioned or undone in this way? And how am I going to fight back? So, it's going to be an important time for that learning to go on for all of us, because I'm sure I don't have to tell you that immigration law and the complicated system of immigration in this country is very difficult to understand. It's broken in many ways, and it's not very well functioning in many ways. And so it's hard to know, what's legal, what's not legal, and then people get so much misinformation and disinformation. And I think whether you're, currently someone who's in the process waiting for your asylum application to be approved, or you're the next door neighbor of somebody who's in the process, I think we all have to be careful about where we get our information, and the kind of disinformation that's out there all the time that, provides myths and untruths. And that's going to be really important that people have places where they can go to for credible sources of information.
Yeah. And let's talk about the tariffs, because Maine is a Canadian neighbor as well. So do you see this as another challenge for the community in Maine as well, the tariffs?
Yeah, I mean, it's been, again, it's one of those areas where I think Donald Trump used something that maybe at first glance sounds like it makes sense to people. Maine was deeply harmed by changes in policy like NAFTA, where it made it cheaper to manufacture goods in Mexico or in China. And we lost a lot of our manufacturing in that period in the 90s, and ever since then, we've seen paper mills closing and all kinds of manufacturing disappearing. So people are predisposed to be protectionist. And I think there are times when it's valuable to show that we want to give a priority to American made goods. But the last time Donald Trump tried to use the tariffs, he used them very badly. And they mostly resulted in increased prices for goods that were made in foreign countries. I heard a story just this morning about Chinese washing machines. So they put a tariff on Chinese washing machines. So the tariff amounted to exactly how much was added to the price of those washing machines. And even worse, American manufacturers added the same amount of money and brought their prices up to the same cost as the Chinese washing machine. So there was no value in it except to cost consumers more. And some American companies made more money off of it. So I think they can be badly misused. They were badly misused on agricultural goods during the last administration. And we ended up spending billions of dollars repaying farmers because of the retaliatory tariffs that came from China and other places. So they could be terribly misused. And as you said, we're a Canadian neighbor. We get a lot of our building materials from Canada. It's already been extremely expensive to build homes in Maine, or really throughout the United States. And if there's a tariff on like softwood lumber that comes from Canada, maybe that creates some opportunities for Maine mills, and I'm all in favor of that. But what if we can't shift fast enough and it just makes houses cost more? I think there's a lot of unknowns. I don't trust Donald Trump's administration because I watched them the last 4 years doing things that were more about the rhetoric and less about really good policy or good economics. I'm going to try to be open-minded if there are things that they do that, hey, that makes sense and maybe it'll benefit Maine. But I know last time it harmed Maine businesses. It hurt lobsters with retaliatory tariffs, and people started buying more lobsters from Canada because there was a tariff on Maine lobsters. Our blueberry industry, there's places where we know how we were hurt last time and it could happen again.
Wow. Yeah. I think we're almost at the end. I want you to again bring a message to the community of New Mainers who feel distressed, who feel targeted with whatever rhetoric going around. So what can they feel? How can you advise them to feel, to behave, to keep hope and faith? And in many ways, all people who wants to help them, would you ponder on that?
Yeah, well, thank you for taking the time to talk to me about this. As I said in the beginning, there's still a lot of uncertainty. We don't really know what this next administration will do. We know they can't do anything until January 20th. I advise, everyone who's in, some stage of an immigration process or trying to bring a family member over to check through all their paperwork to make sure they've got all the information they need, to ask questions if they need to of ILAP or their own attorney, or to call our office if you have questions about things. Just make sure you're as well prepared as you can possibly be for a situation where there isn't always a lot of information out there. And I just really want people to know that Maine has been a very welcoming state, that we have benefited greatly from having new Mainers, people who have come and willingly filled all kinds of jobs from, everything we can possibly imagine, who have become, great citizens in our communities, who have added kids to our school, and just a real diversity and wealth of experience to our state. So I think you'll find a lot of people who want to be there to help you, your friends and neighbors and communities, the state, many of the legislators, the governor. I think you'll just find help at all different levels, but it's hard to be in a period of uncertainty. We truly don't know what this next administration will attempt to do, what they'll be allowed to do, what's legal in the courts that they might think they could do. And you'll find a lot of people in Congress, like myself, who will be fighting against their misguided ideas and will be fighting to keep our country, rich in the diversity that we've always depended on to be a good country. So we're going to be there for you, and we're happy to talk as many times as you need us to along the way, or to communicate with people about what we're learning or what are the truths and mistruths.
I think that would be the way to go. Close collaboration and information sharing. Representative Chellie, thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.